whatever you were gonna do. Cause it's time for Nick and the crew to tell you all the lore that you never knew about your favorite media, my dude. Stuff you're too lazy to look up, Nick and the boys gonna hook you up. From Halo and Batman to religious stuff, LoreCast is starting, so shut the hell up.
My name is OriginalNick. Nick is the shortened form of Nicholas, and I was born in December. St. Nicholas' feast day for the Catholic Church is on December 6th, and of course, St. Nicholas is Santa Claus, who is synonymous with Christmas, which is the 25th of December. So, if you can't tell, I was named after the patron saint, St. Nicholas. Welcome back to LoreCast. Today we're going to be talking about the history and lore of St. Nicholas, and by extent, how he became Santa Claus and how his actions and deeds came into play on Christmas. Before we get into what made Santa Claus, we need to talk about who St. Nicholas actually was. Most research for this section comes from stnicholascenter.org. If you know anything about saints and Catholicism, you'll know that saints were people who did great feats in the name of God. Nicholas was born in 3rd century, and believed to be around 280, in the city of Patara, Lycia, which is part of modern-day Turkey. Nicholas was raised as a devout Christian by very wealthy parents who sadly passed away in an epidemic. Being raised Christian, he followed the word of God and gave all that he had to the poor, using his entire inheritance to help those in need, the sick, and the suffering. While still a young man, he became a bishop within the church, the Bishop of Myra, to be precise. Later, under the Roman Emperor Diocletian, Bishop Nicholas was exiled and imprisoned. After his release, it is suggested that he attended the Council of Nicaea. If you want to hear more about the Council of Nicaea, I suggest you take a listen to the LoreCast Religion, Christianity series that Devin, Benny, and I did. His death date is mostly agreed to be December 6th and around 343 in Myra, and he was buried in his cathedral. That was his life in a brief look. Now we can take a look at some of the lore within his deeds that made the transformation into Santa Claus. Something I didn't cover in the last section was that St. Nicholas is the patron saint of children, sailors in ships, and reformed criminals. Our first story tells of a poor man who had 3 daughters. Now, back in those days, a father needed to offer a prospective husband a dowry, which was usually money or some sort of property. This father had no dowry to give, and was about to put his daughters into indentured servitude, or slavery to put it bluntly. But at different times, each daughter got her dowry paid. Each bag of gold was said to have landed in socks and shoes left by the fireplace to dry. This is how he became known as a gift giver. Our next story is that of 3 theological students who were traveling to study in Athens, Greece, when they were robbed and murdered by an innkeeper and placed into pickling jars. Bishop Nicholas was traveling along the same way and stopped at the same inn. That night, he had a dream of the crime that had taken place within that very inn. He summoned the innkeeper and he prayed earnestly to God that he would restore the boys back to life and be made whole. In France, the story is told a little bit different. This version is more akin to a Brothers Grimm tale than that of a saintly deed. 3 small children were wandering while playing, and they got lost. And while lost, a butcher lured them, captured them, and, well, killed and butchered them. St. Nicholas appeals to God to return them to life and to return them to their families. This is how St. Nicholas became the patron saint of children. Now, I could go on and on about his deeds while on earth. There are many, but I believe the 2 I mentioned here are a very good basis to see how these deeds line up with what made Santa Claus. In this section, we will talk about the traditions that made his transformation. Most research, again, comes from stnicholascenter.org, with a bit coming from history.com. The Puritans and other Protestant reformists did not bring that tradition to the New World, since, as we discussed in the Thanksgiving episode, they didn't want anything to do with the Catholic Church, meaning saints were left behind. St. Nicholas was brought to the West by the Germans in Pennsylvania, who kept St. Nicholas Day feast, as well as the Dutch bringing tales of St. Nicholas. In 1773, New York non-Dutch patriots formed the Sons of St. Nicholas, a non-British symbol to counter English St. George societies, rather than to honor St. Nicholas. And in 1809, we get our first look at the jolliness of St. Nicholas. Washington Irving wrote a satirical fiction called Knickerbocker's History of New York, showing not our bishop of old. Irving portrayed our saint as a portly Dutchman who flies in the skies in a wagon, dropping gifts down chimneys. And during the Civil War, Thomas Nast, a cartoonist, published a series of depictions of a very rotund and jolly St. Nicholas. And it was Nast, in 1897, that first suggested that St. Nicholas lived not in Turkey nor Holland, but in fact, the North Pole. By the way, I did not know that Santa means saint. I had no idea until I had heard Mary, the mother of Jesus, be called Santa Maria. Santa and saint. And Klaus is the Germanic shortened version of Nicholas. Klaus. Claus. The more you know. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of LoreCast, where we talked about the folklore and history of St. Nicholas and his deeds that led him to becoming the face of Christmas. I want to thank all of you who listened to this Christmas-themed LoreCast episode for making it what it is. I also want to thank BeetleMilk Publishing for making the intro song and artwork for the episode and for LoreCast as a whole. You can find them down in the show notes or the YouTube description, BeetleMilk.com, or BeetleCast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you all in the next episode of LoreCast. Have a wonderful holidays, Merry Christmas, and Happy Holidays.